Four women, designer dresses torn at the seams, blood drying on their faces, their jewelry gone, their phones gone, their shoes gone, were lying on the red clay shoulder of a two-lane county road in the middle of rural Georgia, with no houses, no cell signal, and no reason to believe that anyone was coming. Their rented Escalade was on its roof in the drainage ditch, the windshield shattered outward like a glass flower that had bloomed in the wrong direction. The engine was still ticking, cooling down. The airbags hung limp and powdered with dust. The suitcases that had been in the trunk were open and emptied across the road. Their contents, silk blouses, laptops, prescription bottles, scattered in the red dirt like evidence at a crime scene, which is exactly what it was. Two men in a gray pickup had run them off the road 11 miles south of a town that most GPS systems could not find. The men had taken their phones, their wallets, their watches, a briefcase containing $400,000 in signed contracts, and a leather portfolio that held the merger documents for the largest clean energy acquisition in the southeastern United States. Then they had driven away and left four women on a road that the county had stopped maintaining 3 years ago. That was 90 minutes ago. In 90 minutes, 6 vehicles had passed. None of them stopped. A feed truck slowed, looked, and accelerated. A sedan with Alabama plates did the same thing. A woman in a minivan made eye contact with one of the bleeding women on the shoulder and then locked her doors and drove faster. The sun was at 98 degrees. The asphalt shimmered. The pine trees pressed in from both sides like walls, and the only sounds were cicadas, the ticking engine, and the voice of a woman who had been calling for help for over an hour and had nothing left in her throat. Then an engine appeared in the distance. Not the clean purr of a late-model sedan, something rougher, older, the diesel rattle of a truck that had been driven hard for a long time and had never once complained about it. A 2008 Chevy Silverado, the color of rust and prayer, pulled onto the shoulder, the brakes sighing as it stopped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, 34 years old, wearing a gray mechanic's shirt with the name Herschel's Auto stitched over the pocket in red thread, steel-toed boots, and hands that carried the permanent black of engine grease in every crease and under every nail. He was not tall, he was not imposing. He was the kind of man you would walk past in a hardware store without a second glance. He looked at 4 bleeding women lying on the shoulder of a road where nobody had stopped for 90 minutes. Women twice his income, twice his education from a world he had never entered and never would. He did not know their names. He did not know what they did. He did not know that one of them ran a company worth $4 billion, or that another managed a technology fund that employed 6,000 people, or that the briefcase in the ditch contained documents that would move markets. He set his toolbox down on the shoulder. He knelt beside the woman closest to the road, the one whose head was bleeding, whose eyes were half closed, whose breathing was shallow and fast. He placed 2 fingers on her neck, checked her pulse the way someone checks a pulse who has done it before, and then he looked at the other 3 and said 6 words that none of them would ever forget. Don't be scared. I'll help you. Before you continue, if you're the kind of person who believes the most powerful thing in the world is a man who helps strangers for no reason at all, subscribe to Untold Backbone. This story is just the beginning. Warren Briggs did not become the kind of man who stops on empty roads by accident. He became that kind of man because of a night he could not take back. But first, Jessup, Georgia. Population 2,100 and falling. The kind of town where the tallest building on Main Street had been boarded up since the mill closed, where the only grocery store left was Airlines General, a cinder-block building with a hand-painted sign and a screen door that had been repaired so many times it was more patch than door, where the nearest hospital was 41 minutes away if you drove 10 over the limit, which everyone did because the ambulance took longer. This is where Warren Briggs lived, not because he chose it, because choosing requires options, and options require money, and money had never been something that stayed in Warren Briggs's life long enough to offer him a choice. He was 34. He had grown up in this town, in a shotgun house on a dirt road past the creek, the kind of house where the porch sagged on the left side and the roof had been patched with a blue tarp that had become as permanent as the shingles it was supposed to replace. His father, Eugene Briggs, had worked at the Georgia Pacific lumber mill for 22 years until it closed, and then he had driven a delivery truck for a feed company until his back gave out, and then he had sat on that sagging porch and watched the road for the rest of his life, which was not long. He died of a stroke at 57, sitting in the same chair, looking at the same road, holding a cup of coffee that was still warm when Warren found him. His mother, Betty, had left when Warren was 11. She moved to Macon with a man who sold insurance and promised her a different life. She called every Sunday for 6 months, then every other Sunday, then once a month. Then the number she had given him was disconnected, and that was that. Warren learned early that some people leave and don't come back, and that the people who stay are the ones who matter, and that staying is the hardest thing a person can do. He stayed. He graduated from Jessup County High School, 11th in a class of 93, smart enough to get accepted into Georgia Southern's mechanical engineering program, smart enough to know he could not afford it. That acceptance letter was still pinned on the wall above the desk in his bedroom, a wobbly table he had reinforced with angle brackets from Herschel's shop. He looked at it every morning. Every morning it said the same thing, close, but not close enough. He had married Teresa Watkins when they were both 24. She was a home health aide who drove 40 minutes each way to care for elderly patients in Vidalia. She had a laugh that started in her stomach and traveled outward, and she had a way of looking at Warren when he was frustrated that made him feel like the frustration was temporary, but she was not. Cora was born in 2018. Teresa died in 2021, on a January night, on a county road that looked a lot like County Road 12, when her Honda Civic hit black ice at the bridge crossing near Ailey and went into the creek. She was 30 years old. The highway patrol said she died on impact. Warren chose to believe that. He chose to believe it the way you choose to believe certain things, not because you have evidence, but because the alternative is a darkness you cannot survive. He raised Cora alone. Every morning at 5:40, he checked on Mama Jean, Teresa's mother, 71 years old, COPD oxygen tank beside the bed. A woman who used to sing alto in the Mount Moriah Baptist Church choir, but now couldn't climb the porch steps without stopping to breathe. He made her oatmeal with the brown sugar she liked. He checked her oxygen level. He counted her pills. Then he made Cora's lunch, peanut butter and honey on wheat, apple slices, a juice box, and a note folded into the sandwich bag that said something different every day. Monday, you are brave. Tuesday, you are smart. Wednesday, you are enough. Friday, I love you more than trucks. Cora was 8. She had Teresa's laugh and Warren's stubbornness, and a habit of drawing horses on every piece of paper she could find, including the back of Mama Jean's prescription labels, which the pharmacist had learned to check before scanning. She carried a purple backpack that was too big for her body, and she walked to the bus stop every morning at 7:15 with the confidence of a person who has never doubted that her father would be there when she got home, because he always was. After the bus, Warren walked 2 miles to Herschel's Auto, the only mechanic shop within 20 miles. Herschel Owens, 62 years old, hands like leather mitts. A man who had been fixing engines since before Warren was born and who had hired Warren at 17 because the boys got hands that listen: oil changes, brake jobs, tire rotations, transmission rebuilds, whatever came through the bay door. Warren did it all, 6 days a week, for $14 an hour. After work, he picked up side jobs, mowing lawns for elderly neighbors, clearing brush, fixing fences, rewiring outlets in houses where the wiring was older than the people living in them. Every dollar went into a coffee can under his bed, not for himself, for Mama Jean's oxygen refills. Last month, the medical supply company raised the copay again. Warren did not say a word about it. He started skipping lunch, $5 here, $6 there. The coffee can was up to $168 now. Mama Jean did not know he was skipping meals. Cora did not know either. He planned to keep it that way. But Warren was not just a man who worked hard. He was a man who dreamed precisely. Every night, after Cora was asleep and Mama Jean's evening pills were counted, and the house was locked and the only sound was the oxygen concentrator humming in the back bedroom, Warren sat at the kitchen table, the same table where his father had once sat, the same table where his acceptance letter had been opened and read and reread, and then pinned to the wall like a flag of a country he could see but never enter, and he opened a composition notebook. The cover was soft at the corners. The pages were covered with drawings. Not doodles, not sketches, engineering blueprints, engine cross-sections with tolerances marked to the 100th of an inch, bridge load diagrams, structural stress calculations, the kind of work that made Herschel shake his head and say, "Son, you are wasting the best brain in this county on my oil pans." Warren wanted to build things. Real things, bridges that held, engines that lasted, structures that stood up when everything around them was falling down. But for now, the only thing he was building was a coffee can of crumpled bills, and it was never enough. There was a reason Warren Briggs stopped on empty roads. It was not because he was born good. It was not because his grandmother had taught him a Bible verse. It was because of a night 4 years ago that he could not take back and could not forget, and that woke him up at 3 a.m. sometimes with a feeling in his chest like someone had placed a stone on his sternum. It was November. Cora was 4. He was driving home from a late job, rewiring a chicken house for a farmer in Emmanuel County, and he was tired in the way that single fathers are tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones and never fully leaves. It was dark. Route 56. A 2-lane road with no streetlights and no shoulder, just pine trees and ditch and darkness. He saw it at the last second, a car on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, the hood up, a figure standing beside it waving, a woman. He could see her silhouette in his headlights, arms moving, trying to flag him down. He slowed, he almost stopped. His foot was on the brake, and then Cora coughed in the car seat behind him, a wet, rattling cough that she had been carrying for 2 days, and he thought about the clinic in the morning and the copay, and the fact that he was already 30 minutes late, and the thought entered his mind the way thoughts enter when you are exhausted and afraid. It's not my problem. He drove past, he watched the woman shrink in his rearview mirror, still waving, still standing there in the dark on the side of a road, where nobody was going to stop because nobody ever stopped on Route 56 at that hour. He went home. He gave Cora her medicine. He put her to bed. He sat on the porch in his father's chair and stared at the road and told himself that someone else would stop. Someone always stops, it's not like no one would come. 3 days later, he heard it on the radio at Herschel's shop. A woman named Doreen Pace, 53 years old, a school bus driver from Swainsboro, had been found dead in her car on Route 56. Engine failure. No phone, no passing motorist had stopped. She had suffered a cardiac event while waiting for help that never came. The coroner estimated she had been alive for approximately 4 hours after her car broke down. 4 hours, on a road that Warren Briggs had driven past because his daughter had coughed. He did not tell anyone. He could not tell anyone. How do you say out loud that you drove past a woman who died because you were tired? How do you carry that? Where do you put it? He put it in his chest, next to the stone, and he carried it the way you carry things that are too heavy to set down and too important to forget. He made himself a promise that night in his father's chair on the sagging porch, staring at the same road Eugene Briggs had stared at until the day he died. He promised that he would never drive past again. Not a broken-down car, not a flat tire, not a stranger on the shoulder, not anyone ever for any reason. He would stop. He would always stop. Even when it was late, even when he was tired, even when his daughter was coughing in the back seat. Especially then. In the 4 years since that promise, Warren Briggs had stopped 41 times, changed 9 tires, jump-started 14 batteries, called 6 ambulances from the ridge on County Road 7, where you could sometimes catch a single bar of signal if you held the phone above your head and stood on the hood of your truck. He had given away his last bottle of water 11 times. He had taken off his own shirt to press against a bleeding wound twice. He had been late to pick up Cora from the bus stop 6 times, and each time Cora had waited at the mailbox with her purple backpack and her horse drawings, and had said the same thing when he pulled up. "Were you helping somebody, Daddy?" "Yes, baby." Okay. That was their routine. That was their language. That was the silent contract between a father and a daughter who had learned, without anyone teaching her, that her father stopped for people, and that stopping was not an interruption of his day but the defining act of it. Cora did not know about Doreen Pace. She did not know about Route 56 or the rearview mirror or the stone in her father's chest. She just knew that her daddy stopped, and she was proud of him. And she set the kitchen table for 2 every evening and waited. And she was never afraid when he was late because she knew, with the certainty that only an 8-year-old can possess, that he was out there doing what he always did. Helping somebody, because it was Thursday, and Thursday was as good a reason as any. On that particular Thursday, Warren left Herschel's shop at 2:15 p.m. The Georgia sun was brutal. The kind of heat that makes the road shimmer and the air feel like something you are wearing rather than something you are breathing. He had finished a transmission rebuild on a Dodge Ram that belonged to the pastor of New Hope Baptist, and Herschel had paid him an extra $20 because the pastor had tipped for fast work. $20. Enough for 3 days of Mama Jean's oxygen, or 2 weeks of Cora's juice boxes, or 1/7 of the acceptance letter on the wall. He put the 20 in his shirt pocket and walked to the truck. He took the long way home. County Road 12. A narrow 2-lane road with no shoulder, no houses, no cell signal, just pine trees pressing in from both sides and red clay ditches running along the edges. The kind of road where if something happened to you, you were on your own. He took this road because it was 3 miles shorter than the main road, and 3 miles of gas mattered when your fuel gauge had been lying to you since 2019. He also took it because the road passed the dead oak tree at the mile 9 marker. And Warren had been drawing that tree in his notebook for 6 years. Not the way it looked, skeletal gray, stripped of bark by lightning, but the way it could look. Alive, full of leaves, branches reaching upward instead of sagging toward the dirt. That was who Warren was, a man who looked at dead things and saw what they could become. He passed the dead oak at 2:31 p.m. He slowed down, as he always did, and thought about pulling over to add another sketch to the notebook on the passenger seat. He did not stop. He would stop on the way back, maybe, if there was still light. 2 miles past the dead oak, he saw the Escalade. It was upside down in the drainage ditch on the right side of the road, the black paint catching the sun like a mirror. The windshield was blown out. One tire was still spinning slowly. Luggage and papers were scattered across the road, and the shoulder blouses and documents and a single black high heel lying in the center of the lane like a question mark. He saw the 4 women before he fully stopped the truck, 2 on the shoulder, 1 sitting against the rear wheel of the Escalade, 1 lying flat on the road. Blood. Torn clothes, the sound of someone trying to call for help with a voice that had been stripped to nothing. A feed truck was pulling away in the other direction. Its taillights were already shrinking. Warren pulled onto the shoulder. He turned off the engine. He sat for 1 second. Not because he was deciding whether to stop, that decision had been made 4 years ago on a porch in Jessup, but because he needed to see the scene clearly before he moved. Count the injured. Assess the worst. Prioritize the same way he read a broken engine. Don't touch anything until you understand what is broken and in what order it needs to be fixed. He opened the door and stepped out into the heat. The woman lying flat on the road was in the worst shape. Mid-50s, silver-streaked hair matted with blood, a gash above her right ear that was still bleeding, eyes half-opened and glassy. Heat exhaustion on top of head trauma. Dangerous. Maybe 20 minutes from something irreversible. Warren knelt beside her. He checked her pulse. Rapid. Thready. He pulled the clean shop rag from his back pocket. He always carried one from Herschel's, habit, and pressed it against the wound. He looked back at the truck. He had 1 bottle of water, half full, warm. It was everything he had. The woman sitting against the wheel, younger, 40s, dark hair, her right hand cradled against her chest at an angle that meant something was broken, was watching him. Not with fear, not with relief, with the sharp evaluating focus of someone who was accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately because her career depended on it. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Warren. I'm a mechanic from down the road." There were 2 men in a gray truck. They had guns. They ran us off the road. They could come back. Warren looked up and down the empty road. Nothing moved. The pine trees stood like walls. The heat pressed down. "Then that's one more reason I need to be fast." He turned to the woman whose voice had given out, late 40s, sitting in the ditch with her back against a pine tree, lips cracked white, her throat so raw that when she tried to speak again, nothing came out but air. "Ma'am, I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" She nodded. "Good." "What's your name?" She mouthed it. "Rachel." "Rachel, you're going to be fine. I'm going to get help." The 4th woman was standing. She was the youngest. Mid-40s, a bruise forming on her left cheekbone, her dress torn at the shoulder, but upright, alert, the kind of person who processes crisis by moving. She had already gathered the scattered papers from the road and stacked them against the wheel of the overturned Escalade. "My phone is gone," she said. "All our phones are gone. There is no signal out here anyway." "I know," Warren said. There is a ridge about a mile and a half south. Sometimes I can catch one bar up there. You're going to run a mile and a half in this heat. Yes, ma'am. You don't even know us. Warren looked at her. He looked at the woman bleeding on the ground, at the woman with the broken hand, at Rachel, whose voice had been screaming for help into empty woods for over an hour. I don't need to know you, he said. You need help. I'm here. He turned to the woman with the evaluating eyes, the one who had been watching him since he stepped out of the truck, who had not screamed, had not cried, had sat with a broken hand against a totaled Escalade and studied him the way she studied everything, with the relentless analytical precision of someone who ran a $4 billion company and had not gotten there by missing details. Her name was Elena Garrett. She was the founder and CEO of Garrett National Infrastructure, a company that built highways, bridges, and airport terminals in 23 states. She had 14,000 employees, annual revenue of $4.2 billion, and a compass star tattoo on the inside of her left wrist that she had gotten the day she buried her son. But Warren did not know any of that. He saw a woman with a broken hand and blood on her face sitting in a ditch on a road where nobody stopped. And he did what he did. He opened the Silverado's cab, pulled out the first aid kit he kept behind the seat, gauze, tape, a bottle of hydrogen peroxide that was a quarter full. And he went to work. He stabilized Elena's hand with a splint made from a wooden paint stirrer and electrical tape from his toolbox. He elevated Sandra Crane's head and kept pressure on the wound. He gave Rachel his last mouthful of water. He took off his own shirt and soaked it with water from the radiator overflow of the Silverado, not clean, not cold, but wet, and laid it across Sandra's forehead to bring her temperature down. Then he said to Elena, I'm going to run for signal, mile and a half south, up the ridge. I'll call 911 and come back. Elena grabbed his wrist with her unbroken hand. Her grip was stronger than it should have been. You've done enough, you don't have to. That woman needs an ambulance, Warren said, pointing at Sandra. And I can run fast. He ran, a mile and a half uphill, in 98-degree heat, shirtless over roots and rocks and red clay that stained his boots the color of dried blood. He found one bar of signal at the top of the ridge, one bar flickering, barely there, and he called 911 and gave the exact mile marker because he had driven County Road 12 1,000 times and knew every marker the way you know the rooms of your own house. Then he ran back. When he returned to the clearing, he sat down on the shoulder next to the four women, breathing hard, sweat pouring off his bare chest, his water gone, nothing left but his jeans and his boots, and his toolbox and the composition notebook in the cab of the truck. Elena Garrett watched him with those evaluating eyes. Even from where she sat cradling her broken hand, she could see the notebook on the passenger seat. She could see the pages visible through the open window, covered with drawings, engine cross-sections, bridge load diagrams, structural stress calculations. Professional-level engineering work, sitting in the cab of a rusted Silverado driven by a man who had just run 3 miles in the Georgia heat to call an ambulance for 4 strangers. Who taught you to be like this? She asked. Warren did not look up. He was adjusting the compress on Sandra's forehead. My daughter says I help people because it's Thursday. She says it doesn't need to be a special day. Elena said nothing, but her jaw tightened, and she looked at Warren Briggs the way no one had ever looked at Warren Briggs before. Not with pity, but with the recognition of someone who has spent her entire career identifying things that are undervalued and knowing exactly what they are worth. The ambulance arrived 19 minutes later. 2 EMTs, a stretcher, and oxygen kit. They loaded Sandra first. The head wound was worse than it looked. Then Rachel, severely dehydrated. Then Vivian, with the broken wrist that Warren had splinted so precisely. The EMT said, whoever did this field work knows what they're doing. Elena refused the stretcher. She walked to the ambulance on her own feet, climbed in and turned back once. Warren was already walking back to his truck. Wait, Elena called. Your name. I didn't get your full name. But the diesel engine was already turning over, and the Silverado was already pulling onto the road, and Warren Briggs was already driving away, not fast, not dramatically, just driving home the way he always drove home. Because Cora was waiting and the table needed to be set and Mama Jean's evening pills needed to be counted. And the oxygen level needed to be checked and there was a lunch to pack for tomorrow and a note to write for the sandwich bag. Friday's note would say, you are loved. He did not leave a phone number. He did not ask for a single thing in return. He just saved their lives and drove home to make his daughter dinner. To be continued in part 2. If you're already wondering who Warren just saved, you should be. What Elena Garrett does next will take 3 weeks, cost millions of dollars, and change one man's life in ways he never imagined. But first, drop a comment below. Would you have stopped on that road? Be honest. And make sure you're subscribed to Untold Backbone, because part 2 is where the whole thing turns. At 6:47 p.m., in a shotgun house at the end of a dirt road past the creek in Jessup, Georgia, an 8-year-old girl named Cora Briggs was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 plates set, 2 glasses of sweet tea poured, and a covered pot of chicken and rice that she had reheated exactly the way Mama Jean had taught her. Low heat, lid on, stir once, don't peek. The table was set perfectly. Fork on the left, knife on the right, napkin folded into a triangle the way Teresa used to fold them, a habit Cora had inherited without knowing she had inherited it. The way children inherit gestures and preferences and small rituals from parents who are no longer there to explain where they came from. Warren's plate was at the head of the table. Cora's was across from it. Between them, a juice box and a horse drawn in purple crayon on the back of a gas station receipt. The clock on the stove said 6:47. Warren usually walked through the door at 6:15. Cora was not worried. She was never worried when her father was late. She knew, with the absolute certainty of a child who has been shown the same truth 1,000 times, exactly where he was and exactly what he was doing. She looked at the empty chair and said to no one in particular. In the quiet kitchen with the humming oxygen concentrator in the back bedroom and the sweet tea sweating on the table, Daddy's helping somebody. She picked up her crayon and went back to her horse. In the back bedroom, Mama Jean was propped up on 2 pillows, the oxygen cannula in her nose, a Bible open on her lap to a page she had stopped reading 20 minutes ago. She could hear Cora in the kitchen. She could hear the concentrator. She could hear the absence of the truck engine in the driveway, and she knew what that absence meant the same way Cora knew. She closed her eyes and said a prayer. Not for Warren. She never prayed for Warren's safety when he was late because she believed that a man doing God's work was already covered. She prayed for whoever he was helping. She prayed that they would be okay. She prayed that they would be worth his time. This time, they were worth considerably more than she imagined. Elena Garrett did not sleep that night. She was in a private room at Memorial University Medical Center in Savannah, her left hand in a cast from fingertip to elbow, an IV drip in her right arm, a police detective's business card on the bedside table, and the image of a man in a mechanic's shirt kneeling on a dirt road burned into her memory the way certain images burn, not fading, not softening, just sitting there with the permanence of a scar. She had already made 3 calls. The first to her chief operating officer confirming she was alive. The second to her insurance company reporting the robbery. The third to her executive assistant asking a question that the assistant could not answer. I need to find a man, I don't have his name. I don't have his phone number. All I know is he drives an old Chevy Silverado. He works at a mechanic shop. And he stopped on County Road 12 in the middle of nowhere and saved 4 women he had never met. That's not a lot to go on, Elena. It's enough. Start looking. She hung up and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed. The IV dripped, and Elena Garrett thought about her son. Caleb Garrett had been 22 years old. He had just finished his first year of law school at Emory. He was driving home to Atlanta on a Friday night in October when 2 men in a parking lot outside Knoxville offered to help him with a flat tire. They beat him. They took his wallet, his phone, his car. They left him on the shoulder of I-40 with a broken jaw and internal bleeding. For 45 minutes, cars drove past a young man lying on the shoulder of the highway. A truck driver saw him and kept going. A family in a minivan slowed down and then sped up. A college kid on his way to a tailgate made eye contact in the rearview mirror and told himself it was probably a drunk. By the time someone called 911, Caleb's blood pressure had dropped below 60. He was pronounced dead at the University of Tennessee Medical Center at 11:47 p.m. 22 years old, on the shoulder of a highway, 45 minutes from help. Elena had not been the same person since. She had not been the same CEO, the same friend, the same sleeper, the same breather. She had buried her son on a Tuesday, a flat gray, nothing special Tuesday, and she had walked out of the cemetery and gotten into her car and sat in the driver's seat for 2 hours without starting the engine, staring at a Compass Rose air freshener that Caleb had hung from the rearview mirror as a joke because he had no sense of direction and thought it was funny. She had started a foundation 6 months later, the Compass Foundation. Its mission was simple: fund emergency roadside assistance programs in rural areas where cell coverage was non-existent and response times were fatal. She had poured $80 million into it over the past 5 years. She had lobbied 2 governors. She had testified before a Senate subcommittee. She had done everything a person with $4 billion can do to make sure that what happened to Caleb never happened to anyone else. And then she had been lying on the shoulder of a dirt road in rural Georgia, bleeding with no phone and no signal, watching cars drive past, and a man in a mechanic's shirt had stepped out of a rusted truck and said, "Don't be scared." She thought about Caleb. She thought about the 45 minutes. She thought about every car that passed, every driver who looked and kept going, every person who decided that someone else would stop. And then she thought about Warren Briggs, who had nothing, no phone, no weapon, no money, no name, no reason, and who stopped anyway. Not for a reward, not for recognition, not because anyone was watching, because it was Thursday. The next morning, Elena called Dennis, her driver of 8 years. He picked her up from the hospital in the company sedan, black, quiet, the kind of car that moves through the world without being noticed, which was the point. They drove in silence for 30 minutes. Elena sat in the back seat with her cast resting on her lap and her eyes on the road, watching the Georgia pines scroll past like a film she had already seen. Then she said, "Dennis, if you saw someone on the side of the road bleeding, would you stop?" Dennis hesitated. His eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. He was 40 years old, a careful man, a professional man, a man who had driven Elena Garrett through 17 states and 4 time zones and had never once been asked a personal question. "I'd like to think I would, ma'am. That's not what I asked." Dennis was quiet for a long time. The tires hummed on the interstate. A billboard for a personal injury lawyer slid past. "Honestly, I don't know. It depends on the situation, who it was, where it was, whether I was in a hurry, whether they looked like someone worth stopping for." Dennis did not answer. He did not need to. The silence answered for him. Elena nodded. "Yesterday I was lying on the side of a road with no phone, no shoes, blood on my face, watching cars drive past me, the same way they drove past my son, and a man in a 15-year-old truck, making $14 an hour, who skips lunch so he can afford his mother-in-law's oxygen refills, pulled over and gave me the shirt off his back." She paused. "I would not have stopped for him. If I had seen him on the side of the road in that truck, in that shirt, I would have driven past, and I know that about myself. And it makes me sick." Dennis adjusted the mirror. He did not speak for the rest of the drive. That night, Elena Garrett sat in the living room of her home in Buckhead, Atlanta. A home with 12 rooms and a view of the city that looked like jewelry from the 14th floor, and she made a decision. She would find him. She did not care what it cost. She did not care how long it took. She would find the man who stopped on County Road 12, and she would look him in the eye, and she would say the thing she had not been able to say to any of the people who drove past her son: "You did what they wouldn't." The search began the next morning. 3 weeks. 4 private investigators, a forensic analyst who specialized in tracking vehicles through gas station security footage, a rural outreach coordinator who drove every back road in a 3-county radius asking the same question at every gas station, every feed store, every church. "Do you know a mechanic who drives an old Chevy Silverado and stops for people on the road?" Nobody knew his name. That was the problem. He had not given his name to the EMTs. He had not left a phone number. He had not filled out a witness report. He had simply driven away, the way a man drives away when he has done the thing he came to do and has somewhere else to be. Sandra Crane, the technology CEO whose head wound had required 11 stitches, offered to fund a digital search, facial recognition, license plate tracking, traffic camera analysis. Elena declined. "He helped us on a dirt road with no cameras. We're going to find him the same way, on dirt roads, face to face." Vivian Foyle, the finance executive, hired a second team of investigators. Rachel Mahoney, the energy COO, whose voice had finally returned after 4 days of silence, personally drove to every auto shop within 50 miles of County Road 12. On day 16, Rachel walked into Herschel's auto in Jessup, Georgia. The bay door was open. A man in his 60s was lying under a Ford Explorer on a creeper, his boots sticking out. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a mechanic who drives an old Chevy Silverado." Herschel rolled out. He looked at Rachel, her rental car, her pressed clothes, her city shoes, with the expression of a man who has lived in a small town long enough to know when someone from outside is looking for something they cannot find on Google. "That's Warren Briggs. Does he work here?" "6 days a week. Left about an hour ago. Went to Airlines to pick up milk for his girl." Airlines General was 4 blocks away. Rachel drove there in 90 seconds. The store was small, dim, cooled by a box fan in the doorway. A woman in her 70s was sitting behind the counter on a stool, reading a magazine with a magnifying glass. Her name was Erline Cobb, and she had run this store for 41 years. And she knew every person in Jessup the way a librarian knows every book on the shelf. Not just the title, but the contents. "Ma'am, I'm looking for a man named Warren Briggs." Airline set down the magnifying glass. She looked at Rachel over the rim of her glasses. "What did he do?" "He saved my life." Airline studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, the way people smile when something they always knew to be true is finally confirmed by someone from the outside. "That boy comes in here every week, every single week. He buys his girl a chocolate milk and a pack of those strawberry wafers she likes. Never buys a thing for himself. Not a candy bar, not a soda, not a bag of chips. Every dollar goes to that child or to his mother-in-law's medicine." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "Last month he was at the register and came up $3 short. I was about to tell him don't worry about it, but the man behind him, Deacon Willis from Mount Moriah, put 3 ones on the counter before I could open my mouth." Warren thanked him, took his bag, and left. The next week, he came in and put $3 on the counter before he bought a thing. Exact change. I said, "Warren, you don't owe that." He said, "Yes, ma'am, I do. A debt is a debt. Wouldn't leave until I took it." Rachel's throat tightened. $3, Airline said. "That's who Warren Briggs is. He'll give you the shirt off his back, the water out of his bottle, and the last hour of his day. But he will not owe you $3. You understand what I'm telling you?" Rachel understood. "He's probably home by now," Airline said. "Dirt road past the creek. Last house. You'll see the blue tarp on the roof. Well, what's left of it been patching that thing since the storm 2 winters ago." 4 black SUVs pulled up to the Briggs house at 4:30 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks and 2 days after County Road 12. The house looked exactly the way Airline had described it: weathered clapboard, a porch that sagged on the left side, a blue tarp that had become a permanent resident rather than a temporary fix, and a yard that was clean and mowed and bordered with flowers that someone had planted with care, even though nobody would ever see them from the road. The Silverado was in the driveway. A pair of steel-toed boots was on the porch. A purple backpack was leaning against the screen door. Elena Garrett stepped out of the lead vehicle. Her left hand was still in a cast. She was wearing a simple black blouse and slacks. No jewelry, no watch, nothing that would create distance between her and the porch she was walking toward. Sandra, Vivian, and Rachel followed. The screen door opened before they reached the steps. Cora Briggs stood in the doorway, 8 years old, holding a glass of sweet tea in one hand and a purple crayon in the other. She looked at the 4 women in their pressed clothes and their black SUVs and their city shoes, and she did not look confused, and she did not ask who they were or what they wanted. She asked the only question that made sense to her, the only question that an 8-year-old who had spent her entire life watching her father come home late because he stopped for people on the road would ever think to ask when strangers showed up at her door looking like they had been through something. "Did my daddy help you too?" Elena Garrett, who had negotiated with senators and testified before Congress and managed hostile takeovers worth billions of dollars without flinching, could not speak. She stood on the bottom step of a sagging porch in rural Georgia, looking at a little girl with a purple crayon, and for the first time since she buried her son, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, baby," she said. "He did." Cora nodded, satisfied as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. "He's out back. He's fixing Mama Jean's ramp. I'll get him." She turned and walked through the house, her voice carrying through the screen door and the kitchen and the back porch. "Daddy, some ladies are here. I think you helped them." To be continued in Part 3. If that question, did my daddy help you too, hit you where it was supposed to hit you, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that this story deserves to be seen. Part 3 is where Elena tells Warren the truth about her son. And what happens to Jessup, Georgia in the next 6 months will change the way you think about what one person can do. Warren came around the side of the house with sawdust on his jeans and a tape measure clipped to his belt. He had been building a wheelchair ramp for Mama Jean's back door, not because she needed a wheelchair yet, but because Warren Briggs did not wait for things to break before he fixed them. He fixed them before they broke. That was the mechanic in him. That was the father in him. That was the man. He saw the 4 women and stopped. He recognized them the way you recognize a dream the morning after. The faces were right, but the context was wrong. These women did not belong on his porch. They belonged on a dirt road 80 miles south, bleeding, crying, waiting for help that was not coming until he came. "I remember you," he said. Elena stepped forward. "Mr. Briggs, my name is Elena Garrett. This is Sandra Crane, Vivian Foyle, and Rachel Mahoney. 3 weeks ago, you found us on County Road 12. You stopped when no one else would. You gave us your water, your shirt, your first aid kit, and then you ran a mile and a half in the heat to call an ambulance. And then you left without giving us your name." Warren shifted his weight. He was not comfortable with this. He was comfortable under a car, comfortable with a wrench, comfortable packing a lunch at 5:40 a.m. He was not comfortable standing on his own porch, while 4 women in pressed clothes told him what he already knew he had done. "I didn't need to give my name," he said. "You needed an ambulance. That's different." Elena smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that people give when they have been searching for something for a long time and have finally found it exactly where they expected it to be. "Mr. Briggs, I am the CEO of Garrett National Infrastructure. Sandra runs a technology company. Vivian runs an investment fund. Rachel is a chief operating officer in the energy sector. Between the 4 of us, our companies employ over 30,000 people. And 3 weeks ago, we were lying on the side of a road in the middle of nowhere, and the only person in the world who stopped was a man making $14 an hour at a garage in Jessup, Georgia." Warren said nothing. He looked at the porch. He looked at the sagging left side that he had been meaning to fix for 2 years. He looked at the blue tarp on the roof. He looked at his boots. "I didn't stop because of who you are," he said. "I stopped because you were there." "I know," Elena said. "That's why we're here." She told him about Caleb. She told him about the highway outside Knoxville, about the 2 men who pretended to help, about the 45 minutes of cars driving past a young man lying on the shoulder of the road. She told him about the phone call at midnight. She told him about the hospital. She told him about the Tuesday. Elena said. Her voice did not break. It had broken years ago and had been rebuilt with something harder, the way bones heal stronger at the fracture. "I started the Compass Foundation because nobody stopped for my boy. Not one person in 45 minutes. She looked at Warren. "And then you, a man with nothing, on a road in the middle of nowhere, heard strangers in trouble and walked in. You didn't drive past, you walked in." The porch was quiet. Cora had come back to the screen door and was watching through the mesh, the purple crayon still in her hand, her sweet tea getting warm. "You gave me something I haven't felt since Caleb died, Mr. Briggs." "What's that?" Proof that it wasn't all for nothing. Warren was quiet for a long moment. The oxygen concentrator hummed in the back bedroom. A mockingbird was singing somewhere in the pecan tree. The late afternoon sun came through the porch at an angle that made the sawdust on his jeans glow like gold dust. "Ma'am," he said, "I appreciate you coming out here, I do. But I didn't do anything special. I did what anybody should do. That's the point, Mr. Briggs. Anybody should. But nobody did. Except you. What happened next took 6 months. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way seasons change. Slowly at first, then all at once. Then you look up and the world is different and you cannot remember exactly when it changed." Elena's team arrived in Jessup on a Monday. Structural engineers, contractors, architects. They looked at Warren's house the way doctors look at an X-ray, clinically, thoroughly noting every fracture. The blue tarp came off first. A new roof went on, standing seam metal rated for Category 3 winds, the kind of roof that does not negotiate with Georgia storms. Then the porch, releveled, reinforced, new boards that did not sag. Then the plumbing. Then the electrical. then an air conditioning unit that replaced the box fans that had been pushing hot air from room to room for as long as Cora could remember. Then a new ramp for Mama Jean. Not the rough one Warren had been building, but a proper one, ADA compliant, with handrails and a gentle slope and a non-slip surface that meant she could sit on the porch again for the first time in 2 years. Mama Jean sat in her chair on the new porch on the first evening after the ramp was installed. Oxygen tank beside her, Bible in her lap, and she did not say anything for a long time. She just breathed, in and out, watching the road. The same road she had watched since she moved into this house 30 years ago, but now from a porch that did not lean, under a roof that did not leak, in air that did not feel like a punishment. Sandra Crane's Technology Fund established a full scholarship at Georgia Southern University. Mechanical engineering, full tuition, housing, books, and a monthly stipend. The first recipient was Warren Briggs. The acceptance letter that had been pinned on his wall for 16 years was replaced by an enrollment confirmation. Warren looked at it for a long time. Then he took down the old letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the composition notebook next to a drawing of a bridge he had designed when he was 19. Vivian Foyle's investment fund set up a trust for Cora's education, fully funded through college and graduate school, with no conditions, no strings, no requirements except that she keep drawing horses. Rachel Mahoney's energy company partnered with 3 local contractors to renovate 6 buildings on Main Street in Jessup. The old feed store became a community resource center. The boarded-up hardware store became a vocational training workshop. Airlines General got a new roof, new refrigeration, and a painted sign that replaced the hand-lettered one she had been using since 1983. Airline stood in front of it on the day it went up, arms folded, nodding slowly, and said, "Well, it's about time." Elena's Compass Foundation opened a regional office in Jessup, the Briggs Compass Center, providing emergency roadside assistance, vehicle repair grants, and cell signal mapping for every county road within 100 miles. The banner went up on a Tuesday. Warren cut the ribbon. Herschel stood beside him, arms crossed, grinning so hard it looked like it hurt. The story reached the media the same week, local first, then regional. Then CNN ran it under the headline, "4 CEOs Stranded on a Georgia Back Road. The mechanic who stopped changed everything." A clip went viral. Warren in the half-finished community center, teaching a contractor twice his size how to calculate a load-bearing wall while referencing structural diagrams from his composition notebook. 4 million views in 3 days. Donations poured into the Compass Foundation's Jessup Fund. Within 2 months, 2 small businesses expressed interest in opening on Main Street. The county reinstated the school bus route that covered Warren's Road, the one that had been canceled 3 years ago, forcing Cora to walk a quarter mile to the highway every morning. Mama Jean's A1C dropped for the first time in 4 years. Consistent medication, proper nutrition, no more choosing between oxygen refills and groceries. And in January, Warren Briggs drove his Silverado onto the Georgia Southern campus for the first time. New backpack on the passenger seat, same composition notebook in his lap, Cora's latest horse drawing taped to the dashboard, and on his wrist a new watch, a gift from Elena, a compass chronograph with a simple engraving on the back. Because it was Thursday. 6 months after that, Elena Garrett drove to Jessup alone. No SUV fleet, no entourage, no assistance, just a woman in a sedan and a long road south. She pulled up to the Briggs house and cut the engine. New roof, clean paint, solid porch. The blue tarp was gone. The sagging left side was gone. A wheelchair ramp curved gently from the back door to the yard, and Mama Jean was sitting on the porch in a new chair, humming something that sounded like it might have been a hymn. Warren was on the porch too, home for spring break, notebook open on his knee. He was drawing a bridge. Not a fantasy this time. A class assignment, a real bridge for a real road with real load calculations and real tolerances, the kind of work that made his professor write in the margin, "This is professional grade. See me after class." He looked up and smiled. "Hey, Miss Garrett, your hand healed up real nice." Elena laughed, climbed the steps, and sat down next to him. For a while, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, watching the dirt road, listening to nothing. The pecan tree, the mockingbird, Mama Jean's hymn fading in and out with her breath. Then Elena spoke. She told Warren about Caleb in a way she had not told him before. Not the facts, not the timeline, but the details. His laugh, the way he pronounced refrigerator with an extra syllable, the Compass Rose air freshener he hung from the rearview mirror because he had no sense of direction. The last voicemail he left her, which she had saved on 3 devices and listened to every Sunday morning. "Hey, Mom, I'll be home by 10. Save me some of that cornbread." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "I spent 5 years and $80 million trying to make sure nobody else's son died on the shoulder of a road," she said. "And then I ended up on the shoulder of a road myself. And the only person who stopped was a man who makes less in a year than I spend on coffee." She looked at Warren. "You gave me something, Mr. Briggs, something I haven't had in a long time." "What's that?" "Proof that people are worth building for." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he reached under his chair and pulled out a small object. A compass rose, hand-carved from dark walnut, sanded, smooth, precise angles cut in the Georgia Southern Engineering Workshop. 8 points, each one measured and marked with the kind of care that turns wood into something more than wood. "I made this for you," he said. "Figured your foundation could use a mascot." Elena took it. She turned it over in her palm. She did not speak for a long time, then she slipped it into her jacket pocket, over her heart, next to the Compass Rose air freshener that she had carried in that same pocket since the day she cleaned out Caleb's car. She drove away 10 minutes later. Warren watched from the porch until the sedan disappeared around the bend where the dirt road met the county road. Cora came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea, looked at the empty road, looked at Warren. "Who was that?" "A friend." She looked sad. She lost her son a long time ago. He was a good person. Nobody stopped to help him when he needed it. Cora was quiet for a moment. She handed her father the sweet tea and sat on the step next to him, her legs dangling, the purple crayon behind her ear. "But you stopped for her." "Yes, baby. Because it was Thursday." "Because it was Thursday." They sat on the porch and drank sweet tea and watched the road turn gold in the late afternoon light. And somewhere on County Road 12, at the mile marker where Warren had found 4 women bleeding in the Georgia sun, someone had planted a small garden, wildflowers, yellow and purple, and a hand-painted sign on a wooden stake driven into the red clay. The sign said, "Someone stopped here." You know what gets me about this story? It is not the scholarships. It is not the house. It is not the community center or the viral video or the $4 billion. It is a man on a dirt road who had every reason to keep driving. No phone, no money, no recognition coming. Armed robbers might still be nearby. His daughter was waiting at home. His mother-in-law's oxygen needed checking. And he stopped anyway, not for credit, not for a reward, not because anyone was filming. Because it was Thursday, and Thursday was reason enough. Somewhere out there right now, on some road in some forgotten town, there is another Warren Briggs, doing the right thing when nobody is looking, helping when it costs him something, being brave when it is easier not to be. The question is, are we paying attention, or are we just driving past? If this story hit you somewhere real, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Untold Backbone, because stories like this deserve to be loud.